Welcome to the High Agency Calling Show. I'm your host, Noah Raboy. Today we're talking to a guest named Jumbo who has a question to ask about family and agency. Go ahead, Jumbo, ask your question.
Okay, the main question is, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, so the question, as it was quoted by you as well, is how can I calculate the amount of agency that I have coming from a broken family? How should I navigate the relationships and establish responsibilities and boundaries in that context? I have trouble figuring out what is not my problem and what is my problem. The things that I would be able to change were I to take on certain burdens or responsibilities regarding my mother and my father and sister and their families, which some of which are also not exactly broken, but complex, more complex than I would like.
That's an excellent question. And I think it goes right to the heart of where agency is supposed to come from. We're actually supposed to learn agency from our parents. But if we are coming from a broken home, it's likely that our parents had deficiencies in agency, or at very least, that they weren't applying that towards their marriage or towards the choosing of a marriage mate in some cases. And even if they were, in the broken situation, we don't tend to get the constant support that we need when we're younger in order to develop agency. So you asked about how much agency you can have coming from a broken home. And this really depends on what you have developed personally, what experiences that you've had. I'm just going to change my mic. It's on the wrong mic. There we go. The sound should be much better now. It depends on what you've done to develop your agency personally. So if you're a very young person, let's say, how old are you roughly? 30s, 40s, 20s?
I'm almost 36.
Okay, excellent. Almost 36. So you've had some time to be away from your family on your own and to develop agency. And the very fact that you're asking questions about agency and that you're concerned about how much responsibility you have is itself a demonstration of agency. The worst case scenario is that we don't have agency, we don't know we don't have it, and we don't know that we could have it. And so we're not interested in it. And your interest in agency demonstrates that you've already started to progress towards developing your agency. Now, how much responsibility you have towards your family, you have the objective answer to that. The objective answer is that they're completely responsible for their problems and you're responsible for your problems. But in reality, even though that is true, it doesn't serve well as an attitude to operate in the world, to basically say that everyone else needs to be independent and we're going to work as independent individuals unattached to each other, because the reality is it's family. And unless you completely cut them out of your life, their actions are going to affect you. And so a high agency way to look at this is to say, I have complete responsibility for everything that happens in my life and all the people that I interact with. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to do things for them. What this means is that you're responsible either for allowing them into your life, or for setting boundaries for them, and perhaps for helping them. But you have to set the limit. You're responsible to set that limit. Could you give me some examples, perhaps, of areas, specific areas where you've had this question come up, where you're not sure if something is your problem or not?
Yeah, let's see, which example would be best. Let me think. So the question is where I'm not sure where the boundary should be, or what is not my problem, or what is my problem.
Yeah.
My relationship with my mother is not so good because, frankly, when I was young, she was a sort of, and is a sort of mentally unstable and histrionic woman. She's, if blame is to be laid on somebody who on one person, I suppose it would be her for breaking the family up. But then again, my father has his part. But my relationship with her, I have set up pretty strong boundaries. I don't go to visit her unless I really have my guard up because of our past when I was young. I live in a foreign country now, and an example is two Christmases ago, I visited home, but I didn't visit her, and I didn't even tell my mother that I was in the country. I told my father and his family, and I told my sister and her family. I didn't tell my mom, and they kept the secret so far as I know. Now, in this context, it's not that I don't speak to my mother, because I do, but I keep it separated. I try to keep my relationship with her was quite toxic, and I don't see much hope of it improving, or I don't see much hope of that relationship reforming or getting to where it ideally would be. So I have to kind of deal with that. And the way I do that is I kind of separate her relationship from my others with my family. So the problem that I have with that part of my family, or with that part of my question is, I want to start a relationship with my mother that in some sense I could be useful, that I could perhaps help her with her affairs. She and I have talked about investing in land and things back where we're from, but at the same time, she and we got into a bind, or what should I say, a dilemma, because I told her frankly, actually, I may not be the person who can take over your assets because of our past. And she was talking about, maybe Jumbo, you could come back and get a real estate license and help me. And ideally, in an ideal world, I would love for that to be the case. I want to be the patriarch who comes in and helps his mother and takes over the family and takes things in a direction and takes on the responsibility, and for her to be able to lean on me. But to tell you the truth, I don't really trust her, and I'm not privy to the information that she has. There's just that relationship is a little bit, there's not a lot of trust there on my part for her. So I don't know if I should.
Yeah, no, what you're describing, you said something very important. You said, I don't know if I'm the right one to help you with this. So she may need help, but because of your relationship, and because, oftentimes in parent-child relationships, the parent assumes they will always be in charge of making the decisions. And yeah, that's true when the child is a baby, but it slowly shifts over until oftentimes in adulthood, by the time the children are in their 30s or 40s, they're often better at making decisions than the parents are, and the parents start to decline cognitively. They get their information starts to age, and often people don't update what they know about the world. And so their children can actually make better decisions than them by the time the children are in their 30s and 40s. And the parents take it for granted, though, that they'll always know more, and they'll always be wiser, and they'll always be the ones making the decisions. And it is a mark of agency to know where your limitations are, to know that my mother's problems are beyond my ken to solve. I just cannot do it, whether it be because of the relationship or whether it be, sometimes it may even trigger us to see the level at which our parents are at, and that can compromise our ability to give them good advice because we get frustrated with them. And we might not get frustrated with someone else that demonstrates the same behavior because we're detached. We don't have that emotional connection. Big part of having agency as well is understanding what our triggers are, and we can remove a lot of our triggers, but sometimes we simply have to avoid that trigger. It can't be removed, and those are often the ones to do with our parents. Those are probably some of the only ones we really can't remove, and so we avoid conversations that hit those triggers. brings back fights or whatever it was from childhood. And that's pretty unhealthy for us. Your responsibility to your mother in this case might be to find someone that can help her. It might actually be better for your health and for your relationship with her if she has someone else helping her, so that when that person has to give her strong advice or tell her that she's wrong, it doesn't affect your relationship with her. You don't want to have to be the one to tell your mother, no, I'm sorry, this is wrong. You're heading down a bad path. This is a terrible investment. I know you want to do this, but it's a bad idea, because that will damage your familial relationship with her. And that's much more important than helping her make money.
That's an interesting, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can think of one person in her life who's already there, who is her adopted granddaughter, who may be the one to do such a thing. And so that made me think, as you said that, it might be nice to develop a relationship with that girl to perhaps advise her in some way. I guess my anxiety is coming from the fact that I may have to accept that my advice will not be followed. I think that's another part of it, is that how much agency I have is a question of how much my word, how much my whether I can give orders, so to speak, and whether they'll be followed. And I don't see much of a chance of that happening with my mother, although ideally that's what would happen. And I think she actually would prefer that it be me. And yet I foresee a future in which she would just her kind of personality, whoever's helping her may end up being a sort of emotional slave, if I can put it in such a way. So it's hard for me to I think perhaps starting a relationship with her granddaughter might be a good way to advise remotely. But
I would absolutely suggest you cultivate a relationship with her adopted, it's a granddaughter. So one of the reasons for that is you may find an actual financial management professional to handle these things. But she'll still need someone there on her side to help her work through it, because the financial manager might say, okay, here's your options. You got 2 or 3 options. Which do you want to pick? And it's good for her to have someone that's close to her there to work her through that choice. And generally, if they give you 2 or 3 choices, they're all good choices. It's merely picking which risk level you're going to accept, or what particular type of investment appeals to you. And so having perhaps a combination of a actual financial professional that's completely detached, that's not related at all, and then having that granddaughter there to help her work through each decision. Okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, let's buy this property, hey, can you come with me to look at it? Give someone for her to talk these things out with, that's not you, so that you can't get on a plane and go down there and look at property with her, but a closer relative can. Now, you have to think of something else too. See, since she raised you, she probably is the one who installed any buttons in you. She's the one that basically trained you when you were young and taught you the reactions to have. Yeah. And as we get older, sometimes we unprogram ourselves from what our parents taught us if it's not functional. But mothers who are, as you described, histrionic and extremely emotional, and was she manipulative as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so manipulative mothers and manipulative fathers as well, they will install triggers in you that they can push, and you don't even know they're there. They can push them to get compliance. And that's why they can frustrate us, and they can almost confuse us in a way that other people can't. And it doesn't matter how strong we are; those buttons are in there. And in the in the agency training courses that I give people, we teach them to find those buttons and to unprogram themselves from them so that they can't be pushed anymore. But sometimes they're so deep buried in our psyche, they were installed in us before we could speak, that the best thing we can do is just kind of put a cover on them, put a protection on that switch, and then just don't let anyone get close enough to push them. And then that includes our parents. And that means making boundaries with them where there are issues we don't work on, we don't talk about. Very often that is connected with money and resources. That's one of the big issues that people often find it's better not to help their parents with money, but rather to help them find someone that everyone can trust to help them manage their money.
That's perfect. Yes, that's great. A great way of articulating sort of the solution that I thought I might. That's what I told her, is that you would need somebody who's not me anyway, because not only is it a problem for me personally, emotionally, in my own selfish way, but it's also that for her and I to be a team, our past is a source of weakness for us, and that in a under pressure, or if there were some tense situation that arose, she and I might lapse into a weak, into an old fight or something when we need to be standing strong together. So it was actually kind of embarrassing and sad for me to accept this fact that it may be that she and I can't work together simply because we'll bring each other down as a team. So this sounds like a good idea. Basically,
it's embarrassing, but it's really a demonstration of your agency. You recognize your limits. A man's got to know his limits. You got to know what is not the right choice for you. It's almost as important as knowing what you should do as knowing what you shouldn't do. And you have a good gut instinct about this. You're right that this isn't the best choice for you or for her, because you, of course, you love your mother. You want to help her to also make good decisions, and that's unlikely to happen if you're both triggering each other. Yes. And mothers sometimes are also triggered by their kids, because the kids sometimes install triggers in the mother too. So you end up triggering each other, or you're triggering something that her parents installed in her that's related to child-parent interactions.
Yeah, and another dimension of it, this isn't just to talk about myself, but to supply another dimension, is that she divorced my father and has just a lot of hang-ups about him, and I, of course, being his son, resemble him, and so I triggered her just by developing into adolescence and resembling him in his behaviors and his looks. Really caused a lot of friction between us, and it was a great source of resentment that I had for her, because she sort of she wanted to keep me from developing the masculinity that she felt threatened by. And I know that this is a horrible problem that a lot of millennial men like myself are facing in this day and age, is that a lot of mothers are, and because the society is encouraging this in them, are lashing out against the masculine, and this includes their own sons who are in the image of their father or whoever it may be. That's one dimension of it that's caused a lot of resentment. But as you say, like I feel a little bit, I feel safe now in that I understand that that's a separate issue from the fact that she's just my mother. And I do want our family and her resources and everything to be directed to go to a good place in the future. And I would love to, help her. And I am proud that she's my mother, even with all of the crap that's happened. I'm still her son. She's still my mother. And that was important for me to make this distinction. It's only happened in the past couple of years that I've really come to the distinction, that my resentment for her and the ideological problems that I may have with the society and everything, that I can deal with that separately.
Yes, and even if your mother and you had an ideal relationship and you didn't come from a broken home, it may not be good to mix family and business, because of the potential for it to hurt your familiar relationships. I see a lot of families, I've even been part of families where everything was good except for the part where they intersected in their businesses. And that's where all of the stress and fighting in the family came from. And if that wasn't there, the family would have been a lot more united. And it can actually cause, money can separate friends, it can separate family. And it's very often best to, rather than helping people with the problem, is help them to find someone who can help them, someone that's trustable. And whether that is basic financial management, whether that is managing wealth creation or growth, or managing a business even, it really helps to have that separation, that 1 degree of separation, where there is someone who is not emotionally connected that can give advice. It's the same reason why people come to a coach, for example. You go to a coach because you have someone that's not emotionally connected to you to give you very objective advice that's outside of, what the people in your sphere are giving you.
I see. Yes, makes sense.
You mentioned also, I think it was your sister.
Yes.
And her family.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that and what some of the questions you might have surrounding that specifically are.
Oh, well, I guess I'm not sure that I have a question as to which way to go forward. Maybe more of a question of how to get my sister to make better decisions. But again, okay, I'll tell the story. So back in 2011, my sister and her husband adopted 3 children. This is where the adopted granddaughter comes in that I mentioned before. She and her husband and my mother, who encouraged them, adopted these 3 children who are our relatives. They are my cousin's children, and my cousin was in a very high-risk environment. He was a drug addict. He was violent. Their mother was also violent, and the men that she was with were violent. They were disturbingly abused as children, these 3 kids. My mother and sister kind of saw this and wanted to adopt them. And I was against it. I was not even in the country. But when they told me about it, I said, I'm against it. I don't want you taking in these kids, because I saw my sister as not fully matured, not ready to take on such a burden. And I saw it as not our problem. That, these kids, as terrible and as much as they needed somebody, I didn't want that somebody to be my sister. And I saw my mother, I saw this as another sort of manipulation on my mother's part, in a sort of war that she has against her own sister. I saw it as another encroachment into my life and my sister's life, another burden that my sister and I did not deserve, but was being pushed on us by my manipulative, chaos-mongering mother. That's how I saw it. There are dimensions to it that I didn't know. I mean, they told me later, and even my father told me, maybe, Jumbo, if you had seen those kids in the condition they were in, maybe you would have, I'm not sure I would have. I think there's a sort of feminine instinct to take care of these poor kids. And I see it as heroic that my sister took on that burden, but it did age her over these past 10 years. It did hurt her deeply. The kids they had a dissociative identity disorder. The kids were, they drove her nuts, and her husband. And I was watching this all from afar and feeling like, nobody's going to listen to me, and I can't do anything about this. And I'm the bad guy for not caring about the poor children. My sister was very defensive in the beginning, but she's a little bit more understanding now. But she still sees my discrimination as a sort of alien thing, and I think it's like I'm making masculine distinctions, I'm trying to be a bit, shall we say, patriarchal, and they didn't expect that, my mother and sister. As I had, when I moved out of the country and have developed independently on my own, I have matured, I've become a man, and to see me making these kind of harsh statements really pissed them off. And yet now they know that in some ways, at least, I was right. The cost was great, and I didn't want my sister to bear that. So now I guess the question is not so much where to go forward, I guess, but I guess I just wanted to share that.
It is interesting, and there's a reason you wanted to share it. Is I think I think that you were right, even though it's harsh and it's painful, and instinctually, women listening to this conversation will think you're wrong, and masculine men will tend to think you're right, and effeminate men will think you're wrong. Now, I'm not saying that if someone thinks that your decision was wrong, that they're a bad person, or vice versa. But you did what a man should do, and that is make the hard decisions. Now, they're not called hard decisions for no reason. If they were all easy decisions, then we wouldn't need men if all the decisions in the world were easy. We exist to make those hard decisions, to set boundaries. And boundaries are you're in or you're out.
Yeah.
There's not a degree of in and outness. There are, of course, concentric circles in which these boundaries occur. You have the close family boundary. You have the far family boundaries. But again, it's a case of not necessarily that you said, don't help these children. That's not what you said. You said adopting them is a mistake.
Yes.
And I think that is what's difficult, is that the two women basically conspired together to make something happen using feminine intuition. And I'm curious what her husband actually would have said about this. Do you know how he felt about it? Or did he just kind of go along with it because he got outnumbered?
I would say the latter. To put not to say that I know for sure, but that's my impression, that he's a bit of an idealistic kind of guy. He's
feminine minded, that sounds like.
I would say, yeah. He was thinking about the fantasy. And my sister even said this later, like in a Facebook post years later, maybe 5 years later, she wrote, now she's an advisor to other, prospective adopting parents, because she's lived through this. And she was saying something along the lines of, you have to get rid of the fantasy. Those are her words. She said, lose the fantasy. I think that he was living in the fantasy up until it came and got him. And had he objected, my mother and sister would have been all over him like a dog on a three-legged cat. So, yeah.
Yes, and if you're a man and you're in a relationship, especially if you're married, and you haven't already established primacy of decision making, so that you're the patriarch of the family, and within you assign your wife has a sphere of responsibilities, and you don't need to tell her what to do within that sphere. She gets that done on her own. But when it comes to the big decisions in the family, you have to have veto power over the decisions that are being made. And if you don't, there's no such a thing as equal partners.
Yep.
It's not possible, because somebody has veto power over the decision. And if somebody has veto power over the decision, that person's in charge. And if you're a man, either you establish your patriarchy in the family, or you live under a matriarchy. There's no equality. That's what men who live under a matriarchy and are pretending it's not happening say. They say, oh, well, we're equal.
That's what he would say. That's definitely what he would say. Yes.
Yeah, and what that means to me is your wife's in charge. That's all that means. And that,
yes.
For all practical purposes, that's what ends up happening. So what happened was, he really made his mistake probably back in the dating stage by not letting his boundaries, not setting boundaries, and not letting them be known, and not enforcing them. And then in the absence of strong masculine boundaries, women will do what they do, and that is they'll expand. Normally they expand until the boundary, which is fine. with no boundary, they'll expand, say, their love, their desire to help people. It will expand infinitely. And this is why they will adopt unsuitable, children that they really can't, that are not suitable for their life. Or they will be, let's bring in every immigrant in the entire world into our tiny little country of 8 million people and flood it with, 100 million immigrants, or whatever it happens to be. It's their natural instinct, their healthy instinct, but without a boundary to it, it expands uncontrollably and ends up consuming them. And, do they have any children of their own?
They have, not on purpose, but they have a young daughter now who's a year old, and I've expressed that I told her years back that I didn't want to be thought of as an uncle to the 3 adopted kids, but she was happy to know that I consider myself an uncle to the young daughter now.
Yeah, and it sounds harsh, and I know some people out there are hearing this and they say that's so harsh. But you have to understand, Jumbo is set a boundary and stuck to it. And that is the job of men. We set boundaries and we stick to them. And actually, over time, it appears that your decision has been validated by the outcome. How are the children doing now? Are they doing better? Are they doing worse? Or is it still a mess?
As far as I know, it's if it's a mess, then it's a better controlled mess. They've gotten older, and they don't live all together either. The middle child was the most triggering, I should say, of all of them, the most cunningly manipulative, and the one that drove my sister into a nervous breakdown. And that girl is now my that's why I called her my mother's adopted granddaughter, is because she lives with my mother. So my mother has sort of been taking care of her. And then the other 2, the oldest and youngest, have continued living under my sister's and her husband's roof.
So the hyper manipulative one,
much better. I'll put it that way. They're doing much better.
So the hyper manipulative one went to live with your mother, who is hyper manipulative. Is this so she can get better educated at manipulation?
So I have no idea.
She'll become a master manipulator.
I've tried to. I haven't really inquired much into it. But from what the gossip from my dad, and because my dad and sister, we're all kind of close. We talk. From his point of view, he thought, well, they deserve each other. but I'll put it. But it seems though, now my mother's husband died recently. He was, how old was he? Maybe reaching 70 or 71, and he suddenly got cancer, and it was malignant, and he passed very quickly. And and I was thankful too, that she had the daughter there, and in his final days, she was a great help to them, and according to my mother. And now I don't always trust everything my mother says, but according to her, this granddaughter, really became a big help and was very kind to her grandfather and grandmother. And I would like to hope that she could take care of them, and that they may have a relationship that's, I don't know how healthy it may be, but I like to think, I hope that they might have something good.
Yeah, they can find a way to function. It can be a codependency relationship that's not healthy. The real question is are they helping each other to grow? Now, these children, they came from a situation where there was no good option. And you were trying to pick the option that was best for your family, for your immediate blood. And that is what you should be doing as a man, is looking for what's best for your blood. And after, let's say that they said, we're not going to adopt them, then it would have been time to think about, if we're not going to adopt them, how are we going to help them? Because you could say that helping them had some responsibility in your family, because they were family. There was some responsibility to help them. Yes. And perhaps it wasn't best through adoption. Perhaps there are other ways to help them. Has your sister ever expressed to you Any regret about adopting them?
No, not in any clear terms. No, I think, and I don't want her to. I don't want
No.
to. At this point, I don't want her to feel that vulnerable. I
Yeah.
honestly don't. I would rather that it all be, wait 10 more years or so, and then let the dust settle, and maybe then she can express any regrets she has. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not productive for her to, because once you adopt the kids, now you're responsible for them. That's a no going back situation.
Yeah, and my
Yeah.
boundary was this when I told her, because she, in the beginning, her reaction was very emotional and instinctive, like, "You hate these kids? Do you hate? Are you a hate?" It's like that kind of.
No, I love you.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I just told her, it's better for you that you have a brother who says no once in a while, but again, that was a new thing for her at that time, because up until a few years ago, I was not the man who said no. I was the manipulable older brother that she was able to play from time to time. And she she didn't expect this boundary to be thrown out. So this has been a learning experience for her as to what a boundary even is. Because
Well, it's unfortunate that it had to be her brother to show her that, and not first her father, but then later on
her husband.
Her husband.
Yeah,
her husband should have been showing her these boundaries.
I don't remember saying this, but she told me that I told her that your husband's not even a real man. I don't remember saying that.
You may not have said it in those words.
I may have meant it.
You may not have said it in those words, but I guarantee you, every woman who can manipulate her husband, she knows that. Yes. Nobody needs to tell it to her. It's there, and any little thing can trigger it. And this is part of the reason why these kind of women do get angry, almost violently angry, when someone does stand up to them, because they know that they're not getting that from their husband. They know that he's unlikely to suddenly become that man, although some men, decide to regrow their balls and become men again. But it's something that they need and they're not getting. And women get very upset when there's something they need and they're not getting it. And they need boundaries. They crave them, just like children crave boundaries. Even men, there are things that we crave as well. We like to know what the rules of the game are. What's the rules of the game?
Yeah.
Well, let's operate by the rules. We like that. It gives us a sense of structure and order in the world. But for men, we can create our own structure and order. Most women, their natural tendencies are towards chaos, and they have a very difficult time creating structure and boundaries. This is one of the reasons that women are so interested in religion, is because it gives them an external set of boundaries to help them make decisions in life, and that's healthy for them. And when they don't get that, they get upset about it. So it's something you did for your sister, really, that shows her love, is setting those boundaries for her. And you are out of the country, so you can't show a daily example. But I guarantee you, if her husband was hanging around you, he'd probably start doing the same thing, because he would learn from you. It is something that men learn from other men. I'm curious how you became, how you turned from being able to be manipulated and you became the man that set boundaries. What is it that you think led to that change?
That's a great question. I think it's because I learned, being on my own and spending time in the dating trenches, I started to learn that I had a problem with women, because I was attracting women that abused me. And sooner or later, I had to admit that this is my problem. I'm attracting bad things. That means there's something wrong with me. And luckily, through the wonder of the internet up until recently, there was a lot of great advice for men and for sufferers of what has been called narcissistic personality disorder, things like this. And I kind of delved into those resources from, I don't know, 2011 to 2016 or so, and spoke with other men, sort of applied what I was learning in my own life, and started to understand that I had to change in order to understand and deal with women better. And I started discovering the principles that you've been outlining right now, the things that the kind of like women's fascination and need for religion and structure in men, the way that they react when they don't get those things, navigating the feminine side of my own nature, and learning how to rein that in. Because again, I had a feminine nature because I was raised with my mom and my sister. I didn't make that necessarily clear, but I was one of these, boys that grew up with just women in the house. So I never quite learned those feminine tactics, instinctively was revolted by them, but it was the only example that I knew. And I guess I grew out of that by not being around it, and by having at least some information available, and my own experiences with women where I kind of learned, oh, wow, I'm letting her do this to me. Why am I doing this? And discovering my own triggers and so on. That's about it.
Yeah. And what you're describing is a process of agency building that you did for yourself.
Yeah.
You, by reading the things you read, by seeing what you saw on the internet, it's a kind of pseudo association with men. So when a man produces a podcast, for example, and you watch that podcast, it's almost like sitting there and listening to him talk, and you'll get something out of it. You'll absorb some of his masculine concepts and ideas. And over time, that has an effect on our brain. It reprograms us out of that feminine thinking that we get if we're around women too much. And that, we can also go the other way too. Some men that are married and they spend all their time with their spouse, they end up picking up some of her habits and becoming more feminine. So it's good for men to continue to absorb those masculine concepts, and even better if we can do it live with other men.
I agree.
You actually really have developed quite a good sense of agency about these things. It does seem, though, and it's almost in the questions you asked, you knew what was right, and it's almost like you needed confirmation. And I find this is very, very common, because high agency men, we make our decision, we know what's right, and then we look around and everyone says, oh no, that was too harsh. Oh, that's wrong. That's no good. You have to do things this softer way, this more feminine way, this more low agency often way. Not that feminine and low agency are synonymous, but there's a tendency to push us down towards this low agency behavior. Just go with the flow. Just get along. And we can start to question our own sanity in a way. We can start to say, was I the asshole there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was looking, in speaking with you, you're 100% correct. I was looking for confirmation that what I'm saying is valid, that it's real, that there's a concrete reality there, that it's not just my own chaotic emotions and impressions swirling around, that I'm getting confirmation. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the value of talking to another man. This is why it's so important. I talk about to men all the time that you need other men. You need to be part of a male hierarchy, going to places where there aren't any women, so you're just getting the unvarnished, raw, masculine energy telling you the truth. And it really helps us to understand there are other men out there that think like us. There are a lot of men that think like us but are afraid to say it. It's very possible that your sister's husband had the exact same idea as you, and in his head he's going, he was an idealistic guy, so he may not have had these ideas. But a lot of men, they'll understand what needs to be done, but in their head they're saying, it's just not worth fighting with my wife.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it. And the reason is they've allowed a situation to occur in which they have to fight with their wife. If they had set boundaries early on, they would either have filtered that woman out of their dating pool, because you don't want to marry someone you're going to have to fight with to get anything done, or they would have come to an understanding with her as to how the marriage should be organized and how decisions should be made. And then there wouldn't be any need to fight in the future. You have confrontations and disagreements. Those things aren't necessarily negative. Those are just part of the problem-solving process between two people. But actual fights, actual arguments are what people are generally afraid of. It's not really confrontation. It's negative confrontation people are afraid of. And that sometimes comes from something internal. You know, we have perhaps a natural aversion to confrontation, or it comes from the fact that the relationships we have aren't healthy and they can't withstand confrontation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes. I think in his case, I can't say whether he was. I can't really say whether it was just his idealism or whether he really did, whether she really did break him down. But it just brings up a possibility that I could speak more with him. He probably does need me more in his life. And you're right. I think one habit that I think I should develop more is cultivating more relationships with the men in my life, and not just thinking of them as separate guys who have their own problems. I think maybe cultivating a real relationship with my sister's husband is something I had not considered before, but right now it clicked into place. That's probably a good place for me to start.
Absolutely. And that's actually something I was trying to steer you towards during the conversation. You asked, how can I help my sister? About halfway through the conversation, how can I help my sister to make better decisions? And the key to that is helping her husband lead her towards better decisions by teaching him how to be a better man.
Right.
You know, our agency, it ripples out into the world. You know, you throw a rock in a pond, it makes ripples, they go out. Eventually, the whole pond gets agitated. Our agency is like that. We demonstrate agency not in a vacuum, but as part of a social network. And that ripples out to other men. And the men that see us demonstrate agency, that encourages them to demonstrate agency as well. And then there will be a third party that sees them, never saw us, and they're going to improve their agency. And it's probably a diminishing cascade over time. But the more men that demonstrate agency and start to get to that point where they're not doing it just because they had an example set, but they get enough agency to say, no, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be this man. I'm going to be the rational, logical decision-making man that I need to be. The more men that do that, the more stable society becomes, and it becomes easier and easier for other men to stabilize. Most men are like you, raised by women without a sufficient masculine example to teach them. And so they come to these conclusions on their own in their 20s and 30s. If we make every single man come to these conclusions on his own, we're wasting a huge amount of human potential.
Yes.
The more that we can directly share this with those that we love and care about, the faster that they can improve their agency. And this really is how we're going to save the West, how we're going to improve civilization as a whole, and how we're going to get back on track as a people, is by building up each other's agency.
That's great. Would you recommend, this is just one little more question. I don't know if we're coming up close on time or whatever, but okay. It occurred to me when we're talking about my sister and her husband and the relationship that men should have, for example, that I should cultivate a relationship with him because men need each other to teach each other and to learn from each other. It occurred to me that my habit is to focus only on my sister, and when I give them a call, I'm not so interested in speaking with him. I'm more interested in speaking with her. That's my emotional instinct because of our past together. I think since she and I were children, we have this ancient bond as kids, and yet she's a woman now and I'm a man, and I noticed this. It's embarrassing to me, but I noticed this living alone in a foreign country now. I often wake up in the morning or go to sleep at night singing little stupid songs to myself that are really for my sister, because she and I have this childhood bond. And I guess I regress into that. And I'm starting to see that that kind of childish relationship that I am still clinging to with my sister is causing me to, not that it's invalid, not that it needs to go away, but that as adults, now when I speak with her or call her up or think of her life, I only speak with her, and I push everyone else out into the periphery.
This is partly due to the long time that you guys were together as children,
Yeah.
but this is also partly due to your mother's programming. Single mothers, especially narcissistic mothers, program their sons to focus their life around pleasing women. Now, you figured this out when it comes to dating, and this is why you've changed your dating habits. But the deeper programming is please the women in your family. And that is, that's your mother and your sister, basically. And so there's some deep programming down in there. But the thing you can do that's truly best to help your sister is to help her husband be a better man. Because that's the thing that all women need, is their husband to be the best man he can be, to be the most masculine man, to be the most patriarchal man he can be. And by helping him do that, you're helping her. A few years ago, I started something. What I started to do was, when I would go places, I would greet the men first, and I would just kind of give the women a nod and a hello, unless they were particularly friendly or they were people that I knew better. So I go to the gym, and my gym's super friendly. Everybody shakes hands and high fives when you come in, and it's even though it's a big gym, it's a gym of really hardcore athletes mostly, and a bunch of amateurs and people who used to be hardcore athletes and are semi-retired now. So it's real camaraderie when you go in there. And what I would do is be super friendly with the guys. And I noticed it changed my attitude by focusing on the male relationships, because there's no point in me starting a relationship with attractive girls at the gym. I'm a married man. It's a terrible idea. But focusing on making better friendships with some of the great guys that were at the gym there, it really helped me to think in a more masculine way, because now I'm thinking about, going and seeing my male friends. I'm going and thinking about it. It becomes to me a more male space, and it did change even how people approached me. So now women started initiating coming up to me because I wasn't initiating coming up to them. And so it actually changed the entire dynamic. Instead of me seeking attention, now I got attention whether I even though I wasn't seeking it. And with your sister, phone up and talk to her husband first. Talk to him, see how he's doing, and then talk to your sister. Focus first on those male bonds and male relationships. And then also, of course, cultivate that with your sister.
That's cool. That's golden. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm going to try it first thing. Yeah.
Try that, and then email me and let me know how things are going. And perhaps, we can have another call-in show, or even a private session at some point if you like. I think it's going to about wraps it up, getting about to the top of the hour here. Yeah, just a little bit past. Thank you very much for joining me today, Jumbo. And for everyone who's listening, this has been the High Agency Call-In Show. Don't forget to subscribe. You can go to YouTube to do that. I'm going to put the links below in the Periscope so that you can see as well. And looking forward to doing more of these High Agency Call-In shows. If you'd like to be a guest, DM me on Twitter or go to my website, pathwaytoagency.com, and leave me a message saying that you'd like to be on the show, and we'll try to have you on. Again, if you ask a great question, there's much more chance that you're going to be able to get on. Thank you very much for joining us, Jumbo, and have a great day.
You too, Noah. Look forward to speaking with you again.
Bye-bye.